A puppy keeps following a police officer everywhere he goes, day after day, barking, begging, refusing to leave his side. At first, the officer thinks it's just a stray, until the pup suddenly bolts into an abandoned house, and what the officer finds inside stops him cold. Hidden in the shadows is a starving little boy, alone, terrified, and clutching a photo that changes everything. Because this child isn't a stranger, he's family. And the puppy? He's been guarding the boy like a soldier, waiting for someone to finally listen. What happened to this child's parents? And how is this officer connected to a secret he thought he'd left in the past? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like the story, don't forget to subscribe. Tom Hayes drummed his fingers on the steering wheel as he guided his patrol car down Morton Street. The setting sun cast long shadows between the abandoned buildings, their windows either boarded up or broken. Paint peeled from the walls like old scabs, and faded graffiti decorated the crumbling brick facades. He'd driven this route hundreds of times during his 8 years on the force, watching the neighborhood slowly decay like a forgotten fruit. The radio crackled with routine chatter, but his sector remained quiet. Too quiet, really. The usual corner boys were absent, probably driven inside by the unseasonably cool evening. Empty food wrappers tumbled across broken sidewalks, dancing in the breeze like urban tumbleweeds. As he approached the intersection of Morton and 5th, movement caught his eye. A flash of brown and black darted out from between two parked cars. Tom's foot hit the brake pedal hard, the cruiser lurching to a stop as a scrawny German Shepherd puppy skidded to a halt in front of his vehicle. The pup couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Its ribs showed through matted fur, and one ear flopped while the other stood straight up. Instead of running away, the dog planted itself firmly in front of the cruiser and started barking, its thin tail wagging urgently. "Get out of here," Tom muttered, tapping the horn lightly. The short blast only made the puppy bark more frantically, circling the front of the car with determined energy. Tom sighed and put the car in park. Maybe the dog was hurt or sick. He couldn't just leave it in the middle of the street. Opening his door, he stepped out onto the cracked pavement. "Go on, get!" he called, waving his arms. "Go home!" The puppy bounced backward a few steps but didn't flee. Instead, it tilted its head and whined, then ran in a tight circle before returning to bark at Tom's feet. "I don't have time for this," Tom said, climbing back into his cruiser. He had 3 more hours on his shift, and stray dogs weren't part of his job description. The local shelter had closed years ago, another victim of budget cuts. He pulled away slowly, watching in his rearview mirror as the puppy grew smaller. A familiar heaviness settled in his chest, the same weight he'd carried since cutting ties with his brother Evan 5 years ago. Sometimes doing the right thing meant walking away, even when it hurt. But as he stopped at the next red light, a bark made him jump. There was the puppy again, tongue lolling out as it panted beside his driver's side door. "You've got to be kidding me," Tom muttered. The dog's tail wagged harder. This pattern repeated for the next several hours. Tom would drive away, and somehow the determined pup would find him again. It was like being haunted by a 4-legged ghost. He tried to lose it down side streets, even drove in circles once, but the dog kept appearing. Finally, his shift ended. Tom pulled into the precinct parking lot, the familiar brick building a welcome sight after the long evening. He gathered his things, ready to head home to his empty apartment and leftover pizza. But there, curled up against the station's front door, was the German Shepherd puppy. It lifted its head as Tom approached, those brown eyes following his every move. Up close, Tom could see how badly the dog needed a bath and a good meal. Its fur was caked with mud. and a small cut above its eye had crusted over. Tom reached into his lunch bag, pulling out half of his uneaten turkey sandwich. The puppy's nose twitched, but it didn't lunge for the food when he tossed it over. Instead, it waited until Tom took a step back before carefully approaching the offering. "That's all you're getting," Tom said firmly, more to himself than the dog. He'd learned the hard way with Evan that you couldn't save everyone. Sometimes compassion just enabled more hurt. The glass door closed behind him with a solid thunk. Through the window, he could see the puppy had finished the sandwich and was now sitting at attention, staring at the door with an unsettling intensity. Its reflection was distorted in the dark glass, making it look like a shadow creature waiting in the growing night. Tom nodded to the desk sergeant and headed to the locker room, trying to shake off the memory of those pleading eyes. The night shift was coming on duty, their voices echoing off the tile walls as they changed into their uniforms. Outside, darkness crept across the city like spilled ink. And on the other side of the front door, a patient puppy settled in to wait, its thin body curled tight against the coming night's chill. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Tom's mood as he cruised through his patrol route. He'd barely slept, his dreams haunted by memories of Evan and, oddly enough, that persistent German Shepherd pup. The morning shift had confirmed the dog was gone when they arrived, probably seeking shelter from the light rain that now misted his windshield. "Dispatch to Unit 47, his radio crackled. "Noise complaint at 1242 Sycamore Street. Possible break-in." Tom keyed his mic. Unit 47 responding. He knew the address, another abandoned property in his sector. Probably kids looking for trouble or addicts seeking shelter. The thought made his jaw clench. He'd seen too many lives destroyed by drugs, including his brother's. As he turned onto Sycamore, a familiar bark cut through the drizzle. The German Shepherd pup burst from between two buildings, its fur dark with rain. This time, its barking held a different note, more urgent, almost frantic. "Not you again," Tom muttered, pulling to the curb. The dog immediately ran to his door, pawing at it and whining. When Tom stepped out, the pup grabbed his pant leg with gentle teeth, tugging insistently. "Let go," Tom ordered, but the dog only pulled harder. Its brown eyes held an intelligence that made Tom uncomfortable. The noise complaint momentarily forgotten, he found himself following as the pup released his pants and bounded ahead. The dog led him down a narrow alley cluttered with soggy cardboard boxes and rusted appliances. At the end, a chain-link fence stretched between two brick buildings, its metal weathered and sagging. The pup squeezed through a gap without hesitation. Tom hesitated. Protocol said to call for backup, to wait for support. But something about the dog's desperation nagged at him. With a grunt, he hoisted himself over the fence, his boots landing in a puddle on the other side. The lot behind the fence was overgrown with weeds pushing through cracked concrete. An old house slouched at its center, windows boarded up with plywood that had warped in the weather. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Tom had driven past this place countless times, but never had reason to enter. The German Shepherd darted through the broken door, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Tom pulled out his flashlight and drew his weapon, years of training taking over as he approached the entrance. The wood creaked under his feet as he stepped inside. The beam of his flashlight cut through stale air thick with the smell of mold and decay. Empty beer cans and food wrappers littered the floor. Graffiti covered the walls in layers of faded paint. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady plink that echoed through empty rooms. "Police!" Tom called out, his voice bouncing off bare walls. "Anyone here?" A whimper answered, not from the dog, but something more human. Tom followed the sound through what had once been a living room. An overturned couch lay against one wall, its stuffing spilling out like pale intestines. Another whimper, definitely coming from behind the couch. Tom's flashlight beam caught the German Shepherd's eyes first, reflecting green in the darkness. The dog stood guard over something. No, someone. Tom moved closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. In the flashlight's glow, he saw a small figure curled into a tight ball. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, pressed himself against the wall. His clothes were filthy, his face streaked with dirt and tears. In his hands, he clutched something to his chest, a photograph, its edges torn and worn. "Hey there," Tom said softly, holstering his weapon. "I'm a police officer. You're safe now." The boy shrank further into himself, shaking his head. The German Shepherd moved between them, not aggressive, but protective, as if making sure Tom wouldn't hurt its charge. "I'm here to help," Tom continued, crouching down to appear less threatening. "Are you hurt? Where are your parents?" Instead of answering, the boy's eyes rolled back. His small body went limp, collapsing sideways onto the dirty floor. The photograph fluttered from his grasp. Tom lunged forward, checking the boy's pulse. It was steady, just exhaustion, probably combined with dehydration and hunger. The German Shepherd whined, nudging the boy's face with its nose. "It's okay," Tom assured both the dog and himself. He gathered the unconscious child in his arms, noting how light he felt. The boy's head lolled against his shoulder, dark hair matted with dirt and who knew what else. As Tom turned toward the door, something caught his eye. The photograph lay face up on the floor, its image visible even in the dim light. His heart stuttered in his chest. The picture showed 2 men in police uniforms standing in front of a patrol car. One was Tom, younger and smiling. The other was Evan, his brother, wearing the same smile that had charmed everyone until drugs stole it away. It was taken the day Evan had graduated from the academy, following in his big brother's footsteps. 6 months before, everything fell apart. Tom's legs went weak. He stared at the photo, then at the unconscious boy in his arms. The German Shepherd watched him intently, as if waiting to see what he would do with this revelation. With trembling fingers, Tom retrieved the photograph. The boy stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by the sound of Tom's ragged breathing. The dog led the way out of the house, pausing occasionally to make sure Tom followed. Each step felt heavier than the last as questions flooded his mind. Who was this boy? How did he have this photo? Where was Evan? They emerged into the gray morning light, the boy a dead weight in Tom's arms, the photograph burning in his pocket like a hot coal. The German Shepherd trotted alongside as Tom carried his burden toward the street where his cruiser waited. The night settled heavily over Tom's apartment, bringing with it a stillness broken only by the soft breathing of the boy sleeping on his couch. Tom had done what he could, cleaned the dirt from the child's face and hands, treated the minor scrapes he'd found, and given him fresh clothes that swallowed his small frame. The German Shepherd, Scout, according to the worn tag on his collar, lay pressed against the boy's side, dark eyes tracking Tom's every move. Tom sat in his recliner, the old photograph trembling in his hands. The edges were worn smooth, as if someone had held it often, running their fingers along its borders in quiet contemplation. The image of him and Evan, both in their dress blues, seemed to mock him from across the years. "This can't be happening," Tom muttered, running a hand through his hair. The boy's features, now clean of grime, were hauntingly familiar. The same sharp chin, the same dark eyebrows that all the Hayes men shared. Tom pushed himself up from the chair, movements careful to avoid disturbing the sleeping child. In his bedroom closet, behind winter coats and boxes of case files, sat a cardboard box he hadn't opened in years. Tom pulled it down, sending dust motes dancing in the dim light. Inside, beneath layers of old papers and forgotten mementos, he found what he was looking for: a photo album bound in cracked blue leather. Back in his living room, Tom settled cross-legged on the floor. Scout's ears perked up, but the dog remained stationed by the boy. The album's spine crackled as Tom opened it, pages stiff from disuse. He flipped through images of his childhood, birthday parties, little league games, family vacations. Then he found what he was looking for. A photograph from 7 years ago showed Evan standing outside a small apartment building, arm wrapped around a pregnant woman with tired eyes, but a genuine smile. Tom remembered taking the picture, remembered how proud Evan had been that day, swearing he'd gotten clean for good this time, that he'd be a proper father. Tom's hands shook as he held the old photo next to the sleeping boy's face. The resemblance was undeniable. This was Mikey, his nephew, Evan's son, the child he'd never met because of his own stubborn pride. His throat tight, Tom reached for his phone. The hospital numbers were still in his contacts from years of police work. He dialed the main line at St. Mary's, identifying himself as law enforcement. "I need information about a John Doe," he said quietly, moving to the kitchen where his words wouldn't disturb Mikey. "Probably brought in about 3 weeks ago. Overdose victim. Male, mid-30s, dark hair, about 5'10". The nurse put him on hold. Tom leaned against his counter, the phone pressed so hard to his ear it hurt. When she returned, her voice was professionally sympathetic. "Yes, Officer Hayes. We had a John Doe matching that description brought in on the 7th. Pronounced at 2:47 a.m. Cause of death was heroin overdose. The body was unclaimed and released to the county after the mandatory waiting period." Tom's legs gave out. He slid down the cabinet until he sat on the cold kitchen tile. Did he have any identification? Anything at all? "I'm sorry, sir. Just the clothes he was wearing. No wallet, no ID." Tom thanked her mechanically and ended the call. The phone clattered to the floor beside him. 3 weeks. Evan had been dead for 3 weeks, his body buried in a pauper's grave, while his son lived in an abandoned house with only a dog for protection. The last time Tom had seen his brother flashed through his mind with brutal clarity. It was 2 years ago, at this very apartment. Evan had shown up unannounced, jittery and thin, begging for money. "It's not for drugs," Evan had insisted, though his trembling hands betrayed him. "Mikey needs winter clothes. He's growing so fast, Tom. Please." "Like the last time?" Tom had shot back. "When you swore the money was for groceries, but I found my spare badge missing the next day? The one you sold for a fix." "I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to do better. For Mikey. You're his uncle, Tom. His only family besides me." "No." Tom remembered how cold his own voice had sounded. "I stopped being family when you chose drugs over everything else. Over your job, over me, over your own son. Get out, Evan. Don't come back." "Tom, please." "I said get out. I never want to see you again." Now, sitting on his kitchen floor, Tom pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to stop the tears that threatened to fall. He'd meant those words at the time, had been so angry and hurt that he'd wanted to cut away everything that reminded him of his brother's betrayal. But Evan had died alone, and Mikey, God, Mikey had been out there somewhere, maybe even in that decrepit house, while his father's body lay unclaimed in a morgue drawer. Tom pushed himself up on unsteady legs and walked back to the living room. Mikey hadn't stirred, his small chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of exhausted sleep. In the dim light from the street outside, Tom could see the traces of malnutrition in the boy's hollow cheeks, the darkness under his eyes that spoke of too many nights without proper rest. Scout lifted his head as Tom sank back into his recliner. The dog's eyes, intelligent and somehow knowing, never left Tom's face. "Why'd you come to me?" Tom whispered to the shepherd. "Out of everyone in this city, why did you choose me?" Scout's only response was to lay his head back down on Mikey's leg, maintaining his protective vigil. Outside, the night sky began to lighten almost imperceptibly, the first hint of dawn creeping through the gaps in Tom's blinds. He hadn't slept at all, but exhaustion felt distant compared to the weight of guilt and grief pressing down on his chest. The morning light grew stronger, painting thin lines across his carpet. Tom watched them inch closer to the couch where his nephew slept. This child who had lost everything and somehow found his way to the uncle who had abandoned him. Scout's eyes remained fixed on Tom, patient and unwavering in the growing dawn. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across Tom's kitchen floor. He stood at the counter, pouring milk over a bowl of cereal, trying to remember what he'd like to eat at Mikey's age. The Cheerios looked plain and inadequate, but it was all he had. Scout's nails clicked on the hardwood as the dog followed Tom to the living room, where Mikey sat perched on the edge of the couch. The boy had barely moved since waking, his small frame tense like a bird ready to take flight. His clothes, Tom's old t-shirt and a pair of drawstring shorts cinched tight, made him look even tinier. "Here you go," Tom said, keeping his voice gentle as he set the bowl on the coffee table. "You must be hungry." Mikey stared at the cereal without reaching for it. His hands remained twisted in his lap, knuckles white. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Scout's quiet whine. Tom cleared his throat. "There's more if you want it, and I can make toast or—" "Where's my dad?" The question came out barely above a whisper, but it hit Tom like a physical blow. He looked at Mikey's face, so much like Evan's, and saw the fear beneath the carefully blank expression. This child had learned to hide his emotions too young. Tom's throat felt tight. He's not coming back, Mikey." The boy didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't show any reaction at all. He simply reached down and stroked Scout's head, then picked up a few pieces of cereal and offered them to the dog. Scout took them gently from his palm. Tom watched, his chest aching, as Mikey methodically fed Scout half the bowl of cereal, one piece at a time. The boy's movements were precise, focused, as if this simple task could keep the rest of the world at bay. Later that morning, while Mikey dozed on the couch with Scout standing guard, Tom sat at his kitchen table with his phone in hand. The number for Child Protective Services glowed on the screen. He knew the procedure, had made this call dozens of times as an officer. Standard protocol for any minor found without guardian supervision. His fingers moved automatically, dialing the familiar number. A woman's voice answered on the second ring. "Child Protective Services, this is Sandra. How can I help you?" Tom's grip tightened on the phone. "Yes, this is Officer Thomas Hayes with the City Police Department. I need to report—" He glanced at Mikey's sleeping form. "I need to report a minor requiring temporary placement." "All right, Officer Hayes. I can help you with that. Can you give me the child's name and age?" Tom's mouth went dry. Images flashed through his mind. Sterile offices, overworked social workers, foster homes where a quiet boy and his dog would be separated, where Mikey would become just another case number. "Officer Hayes? Are you there?" "I'm sorry," Tom said. I'll need to call back with more details." He ended the call before she could respond, his hand shaking slightly as he set the phone down. He told himself he just needed more time to figure things out, to understand what had happened to Evan, to find out if there was any documentation of guardianship. An hour later, Tom sat in a walk-in clinic's waiting room, Mikey beside him. He'd called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in years. The forms on his clipboard were half-filled, listing Mikey as his cousin's son staying with him temporarily. He left the social security number blank, wrote "documentation forthcoming" in several spaces. The nurse who checked Mikey's vitals frowned at the paperwork but didn't ask questions when Tom showed his badge. The doctor diagnosed mild malnutrition and dehydration, prescribed vitamins, and recommended a follow-up in 2 weeks. Tom paid in cash. Back at the apartment, Mikey curled up on the couch again, his body curved around Scout's protective bulk. The boy's eyes fluttered closed almost immediately. The doctor had said exhaustion was common with malnutrition. Tom noticed Mikey's dirty backpack tucked halfway under the couch. He pulled it out carefully, meaning to look for any identification or papers that might help him understand the situation. The fabric was worn thin in places, the zipper missing its pull tab. Inside, he found a few items of ragged clothing, an empty water bottle, and a battered composition notebook. The notebook's cover was warped, its pages wavy from exposure to moisture. Tom opened it, expecting to find schoolwork or drawings. Instead, he saw his brother's handwriting, the familiar slant of letters that had once filled police reports and birthday cards. Scout jumped up onto the couch beside Tom, settling close enough that his warm fur pressed against Tom's leg. The dog's presence felt oddly comforting as Tom stared at the first page. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone." Tom's hands trembled as he held the notebook. The words blurred slightly before coming back into focus. His brother's last words, a final message he'd never expected to receive, waited in these pages. Scout pressed closer, as if sensing Tom's distress, and laid his head on Tom's knee. Tom settled onto the edge of the couch, the worn notebook heavy in his hands. Scout lay at his feet, chin resting on his paws, watching with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything. From the bedroom down the hall came the soft, steady breathing of Mikey, finally sleeping in a real bed after who knew how long on the streets. The first page trembled slightly as Tom turned it. Evan's handwriting filled the lines, messy but readable, just like when they were kids. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And knowing me, I probably didn't go easy or quiet. But that's not what matters now. What matters is Mikey." Tom's throat tightened. He glanced toward the bedroom, then continued reading. "First, I need to say I'm sorry. For everything. For stealing your badge when you tried to help me get clean. For disappointing you over and over. For being the brother you had to cut out of your life to save yourself. You were right to do it, Tom. I want you to know that." Scout shifted closer, pressing his warm body against Tom's legs. The contact helped steady him as he turned to the next entry, dated 3 years ago. Mikey was born today. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. His mom didn't make it. Complications, they said. But he's perfect, Tom. Tiny fingers, tiny toes, and these eyes that look right through you. I've never been so scared or so in love in my life. I'm clean now. 3 months. Longest stretch ever. For him. It has to be for him. The next few pages detailed Evan's struggles with sobriety, his joy in Mikey's first steps, first words. Some entries were tear-stained, others written in shaky handwriting during what were clearly rough nights. Tom read about birthday parties and cheap apartments, about times when there wasn't enough food, but Evan went hungry so Mikey could eat. Found Scout today, or he found us. Just a puppy in a dumpster, skinny as a rail. Mikey begged to keep him. I said no at first. Can barely feed ourselves some weeks. But that dog looked at Mikey like he'd found his purpose in life. Now they're inseparable. Scout's already protective, growled at the landlord when he came banging for rent. Smart dog. Too smart sometimes. Tom reached down to scratch Scout's ears, understanding now why the dog had sought him out so desperately. The next entry was dated 6 months ago, the writing more rushed, anxious. Met a guy named Curtis today. Says he knows about my past skills. Offered me a way out. One last job. Big enough to set us up somewhere nice. Get Mikey in a good school. I know better than to trust guys like him. But Mikey needs more than I can give him right now. He's so bright. Deserves better than this neighborhood, these schools, maybe just this once. Tom's jaw clenched. He knew the type. Predators who sought out desperate people, offered false hope that came with strings attached. The following entries grew more scattered, the handwriting increasingly erratic. Curtis isn't someone you trust twice. Should have known better. He's not letting go. Keeps talking about insurance and loose ends. I've hidden what he wants where he'll never find it. There's a safe place. Mikey knows it. The special spot in the old house where we used to read stories. He'll remember. The next page was dated just 3 weeks ago. The writing barely legible. Tom, if you're reading this, I pray it means Mikey found you. I've told him about his Uncle Tom, the good cop who always tried to help people. Showed him your picture so he'd know who to trust. I've got Scout trained to find you if something happens. Smart dog. He'll know what to do. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please, look after my boy. He's the best thing I ever did. The only pure thing in my life. He's quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Keeps everything inside like I used to. But he's got such a good heart. He just needs someone to show him it's okay to trust again. The final entry was just a few scattered lines. Getting worse. Can't shake them. Scout, watch over him. Mikey, the special spot, remember? Tom, I'm so sorry. For everything. Please forgive me. Please help him. Please ... The words trailed off into nothing. Tom closed the notebook carefully, his vision blurring. The weight of his brother's final plea settled over him like a physical thing. He stood, walking to his bedroom drawer and placing the notebook inside. When he turned around, Mikey was standing in the doorway. The boy's face was expressionless, but his eyes were intense, watching Tom's every move. Scout padded over to stand between them, not in an aggressive way, but protective, ready to comfort either of them if needed. Tom knelt down slowly, bringing himself to Mikey's eye level. The boy didn't back away, but his hand found Scout's fur and gripped it tightly. I think, Tom said softly, choosing his words with care, your dad wanted me to find you. Mikey's face remained still, but his fingers tightened in Scout's fur. The dog leaned into the boy's side, steady and strong, a bridge between the silence and whatever might come next. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty playground as Tom guided his patrol car into the small park's lot. It was nearly 11, too early for the after-school crowd, too late for the morning regulars, perfect for a boy who seemed to shrink from other people's presence. Scout jumped out first when Tom opened the back door, immediately positioning himself at Mikey's side as the boy slid out. Tom noticed how Mikey's hand automatically found Scout's fur, fingers weaving into the thick coat like an anchor in rough seas. The park was modest, a few swings creaking gently in the breeze, a slide that had seen better days, and scattered benches beneath shade trees. Tom had chosen it carefully, remembering how Evan used to bring him here when they were kids, back before things went wrong. Thought we could get some fresh air, Tom said, keeping his voice casual. Maybe grab something to eat. Mikey didn't respond, but he followed when Tom started walking toward a small food cart near the playground. The vendor, an older man with kind eyes, smiled as they approached. "What'll it be?" he asked, directing the question to Mikey, who pressed closer to Scout. Tom stepped in smoothly. "2 sandwiches, please. Turkey and cheese." He glanced at Mikey, who gave a tiny nod. They settled on a bench, Scout lying at their feet. Tom unwrapped the sandwiches, passing one to Mikey. The boy held it in his lap, unmoving, his eyes fixed on Scout. Understanding dawned on Tom. He tore off a small piece of his sandwich and offered it to Scout. "Here you go, buddy." Scout took it gently, and only then did Mikey begin to eat his own sandwich, taking small, careful bites. Tom's heart ached, wondering how many meals Mikey and Scout had shared this way, each making sure the other was taken care of first. A light breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of nearby flowering bushes. Tom watched as Mikey methodically ate half his sandwich, then wrapped the rest carefully in its paper. The boy's eyes darted occasionally to the playground equipment, but he made no move to leave Scout's side. They sat in companionable silence for a while, Scout's tail thumping softly against the ground whenever a bird landed nearby. Tom thought about all the times he'd driven past this park on patrol, never knowing his nephew might have been here, might have needed him. The drive home was quiet, Scout's head resting on Mikey's lap in the back seat. Tom kept glancing in the rearview mirror, searching for words to bridge the gulf between them. Back in the apartment, Tom watched Mikey settle on the couch with Scout, their routine already established after just a few days. The sight reminded him suddenly of summer afternoons long ago, when Evan would take him fishing at the old creek behind their house. "You know," Tom said, trying to keep his tone light as he put away his keys, "your dad used to be quite the fisherman. Could catch something even when nobody else was having any luck." The change was immediate. Mikey's shoulders tensed, his face closing off like a door slamming shut. Scout lifted his head, alert to the shift in mood. "I remember this one time," Tom continued, not reading the warning signs. "He caught this huge bass using nothing but..." But Mikey had already turned away, curling into Scout's side, effectively ending any possibility of conversation. Tom's words died in his throat, leaving only the hollow sound of the ceiling fan spinning above them. That night, Tom woke to unfamiliar sounds. He lay still, listening. There, soft whimpers coming from Mikey's room, punctuated by muffled words. "Dad, Dad, please." Tom's chest tightened. He got up, padding quietly down the hall. The door was slightly ajar, casting a thin slice of hallway light across Mikey's bed. The boy was tangled in his blankets, face scrunched in distress. "Dad, don't go." Tom stepped into the room, reaching out instinctively to comfort his nephew. But his movement cast a sudden shadow, and Mikey jerked awake with a startled gasp. The boy's eyes were wide with fear as he scrambled backward, pressing against the headboard. Scout, who had been sleeping beside the bed, was instantly alert, moving between them. Not aggressive, but protective, giving Mikey the space he needed to feel safe. "I'm sorry," Tom said quickly, backing toward the door. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Mikey's breathing was rapid, his small chest rising and falling too fast. His hands found Scout's fur, gripping tightly. The fear in his eyes cut through Tom like a knife. This wasn't just the startled reaction of being woken suddenly. This was deeper, the look of a child who had learned to expect the worst from adults. "I'll leave you be," Tom said softly, stepping back into the hallway. He left the door as it was, not wanting Mikey to feel trapped. Tom went to the kitchen, filling a glass with water to give himself something to do. He could hear Mikey's breathing slowly returning to normal, followed by the soft creak of bed springs as the boy lay back down. A few minutes later, Tom walked past Mikey's room again, intending to check quietly from the doorway. But he stopped short when he heard Mikey's voice, barely above a whisper, speaking to Scout under the covers. "Scout, do you think he's lying like everyone else?" The words hit Tom like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, leaning against the wall beside the door. Every adult in Mikey's life, social workers, teachers, probably even Evan in his darker moments, had likely made promises they couldn't keep, had offered help that came with conditions, or disappeared when things got tough. Tom walked away silently, leaving Mikey to his private conversation with Scout. Good intentions weren't enough, not for a child who had learned to survive by doubting every offered hand. Trust would have to be earned, slowly and steadily, one small proof at a time. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Tom's office as he sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of old case files. He'd called in to take a personal day, earning a concerned pause from his sergeant before approval was given. Now, hunched over yellowing papers and coffee-stained reports, Tom searched for any mention of Curtis. His fingers traced down lists of names and dates, past mugshots of faces he half remembered from years of patrols. The Narcotics Division's filing system was a maze of cross-references and dead ends, but Tom worked methodically, the way he'd been trained. Each file told a story of broken lives and bad choices, and somewhere in these pages was the thread that connected Curtis to Evan. 3 hours and 2 cups of coffee later, Tom found it. Curtis Monroe, a string of arrests for dealing, mostly small-time stuff, but with a pattern that caught Tom's attention. The locations matched the neighborhood where Evan had lived with Mikey. More recent reports showed escalation, assault charges, breaking and entering, suspected connections to larger operations. The mugshot showed a man with cold eyes and an easy smile that didn't reach them. Tom leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The timestamps on Curtis's arrests lined up with Evan's desperate final months. Something had happened between them, something bad enough that Evan felt the need to warn about it in his letters. The corner store sat wedged between a laundromat and a boarded-up electronics shop, its faded awning flapping in the breeze. Tom had changed into jeans and a worn jacket, leaving his badge and service weapon locked in his car 2 blocks away. No sense advertising who he was in this neighborhood. A bell chimed as he pushed open the door. The store was narrow but deep, with tall shelves creating a maze of aisles. Behind the counter, an older man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his newspaper. Recognition flickered across the man's face. "Officer Hayes," he said, folding his paper carefully. "Been a while since I've seen you around here." Tom approached the counter, surprised to be remembered. "Just Tom today." "You've got a good memory, Mr. Chen. And yes, I remember you. Used to chase your brother away when he'd come in here high, trying to steal cigarettes." The man's voice held no judgment, just the weariness of someone who'd seen too much of life's harder sides. Tom nodded, accepting the memory. "That's actually why I'm here. I'm looking into some things about Evan's last few months. Did you know he was staying nearby? Sometimes I'd see him pass by with his boy." Mr. Chen's expression softened slightly. The kid always looked too serious for his age. Had a dog with him most times. "What about a man named Curtis?" Tom kept his voice casual, but he noticed how Mr. Chen's hand stilled on the counter. "Curtis Monroe?" The store owner glanced toward the door before answering. "He's still around, meaner now." Mr. Chen's voice dropped lower. "Used to just sell his poison, but lately, there's been trouble. Break-ins, threats, people getting hurt." "When's the last time you saw him?" "Last week. Came in for cigarettes, but really he was letting everyone see him, reminding us he's watching." Mr. Chen shook his head. "Whatever you're looking for, Tom, be careful. Curtis isn't the same person you might remember from arrest reports. Tom bought a pack of gum he didn't need and thanked Mr. Chen. Outside, the street seemed different now. Shadows deeper, doorways more ominous. Curtis was still here, still active, and something about that fact made Tom's skin crawl. The drive home was tense, his mind racing through possibilities. If Curtis had been involved with Evan's death, if there was something worth hiding. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He had to be careful. It wasn't just his safety at stake anymore. The apartment was quiet when he unlocked the door, but not empty. Scout's tail thumped against the floor from his spot by the couch. And there, standing in the hallway shadow, was Mikey. The boy's face was unreadable, but his posture was rigid with tension. "Where were you?" Mikey's voice was flat, but Tom heard the edge beneath it. "Work stuff," Tom said, the lie tasting bitter. "Had to check some old files." Mikey stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away, without another word. The sound of his bedroom door closing echoed through the apartment. Tom sighed, heading to his room to change out of his civilian clothes. He opened his dresser drawer and froze. The notebook, Evan's letters, had been moved. Not by much, just slightly askew from where he'd carefully placed it that morning. But enough to know that someone had been reading it. Mikey knew more than he was letting on. He'd read about Curtis, about whatever danger Evan had been warning against. Tom stood there, holding the notebook, feeling the weight of secrets threatening to spill over. His nephew was carrying knowledge no child should have to bear, and Tom had just lied straight to his face about investigating it. Scout appeared in the doorway, watching Tom with those intelligent eyes. From down the hall came the soft sound of Mikey's radio playing, the boy's way of showing he was choosing to be alone. Tom carefully replaced the notebook, knowing that trust, once damaged, was even harder to rebuild. The morning dawned gray and gloomy, with rain tapping steadily against the kitchen windows. Tom sat at the small table, nursing his second cup of coffee, while watching Mikey push cereal around in his bowl. Scout lay at the boy's feet, occasionally lifting his head when milk splashed onto the floor. The silence between them had grown familiar over the past few days. Not quite comfortable, but less strained than before. Tom noticed how Mikey's shoulders weren't as tense, how he'd stopped checking the exits every time he entered a room. Small steps, but progress nonetheless. "Do you know where Dad wanted us to go?" The question caught Tom mid-sip. He looked up to find Mikey watching him intently, spoon forgotten in his hand. It was the first time the boy had directly asked about Evan's intentions. Tom set his coffee down carefully. "I think I'm starting to," he said, keeping his voice gentle. He stood up and retrieved the notebook from his room, bringing it back to the table. Mikey's eyes followed his every movement. Opening to one of the later pages, Tom pointed to a crude drawing in the margin. The sketch showed what looked like a small structure near a curved line that might be a river. "Your dad and I used to fish here when we were kids," Tom explained. "There was this old shed where we'd store our gear." Mikey leaned forward, studying the drawing. His finger traced the wobbly lines. "Is it still there?" "I haven't been there in years, but we could check." Tom watched Mikey's face carefully. "Would you want to?" Mikey nodded slowly, then looked down at Scout. "Can he come too?" "Of course." The drive took them out of the city, past aging suburbs, and into the greener outskirts where development gave way to patches of woods. The rain had settled into a gentle drizzle, creating a misty veil over the landscape. Scout sat in the back seat, nose pressed against the window, while Mikey held the notebook open in his lap. Tom turned onto a narrow road that paralleled the river. Memories flooded back. Summer afternoons with fishing poles. Evan's laughter when they'd catch nothing but old boots. Their father's rare moments of pride when they'd bring home dinner. The road ended at a small gravel lot, now empty except for their car. "It's through here," Tom said, pulling on his jacket. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and helped Mikey with his raincoat. Scout bounded out as soon as the door opened, shaking off the rain and sniffing the air eagerly. They followed a worn path through the trees, Scout leading the way. The ground was soft under their feet, leaves slick with rain. Tom kept close to Mikey, ready to steady him if he slipped. The boy moved carefully but purposefully, as if drawn forward by some invisible thread. The shed appeared through the trees, more decrepit than Tom remembered. The roof sagged dangerously, and vines had claimed most of the western wall. But it was still standing, a testament to stubborn survival against time and weather. "This is it?" Mikey asked, voice barely above a whisper. Tom nodded. "Watch your step. The wood might be rotted." The door hung crooked on its hinges, creaking as Tom pushed it open. Scout entered first, nose to the ground, while Tom swept the flashlight beam across the interior. The space was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with cobwebs in the corners and leaves scattered across the floor. The air smelled of damp wood and memories. Mikey moved to the center of the room, turning slowly. Where would he put it? Tom examined the floorboards, remembering how they used to hide their comic books under them. "Here," he said, kneeling beside a section where the boards looked slightly different. These ones always came up easier. Together, they pried up the loose planks. Scout whined softly, pawing at the edge of the hole. Tom reached down into the darkness and felt something solid. A metal box, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. They sat cross-legged on the floor as Tom carefully unwrapped it. The lid was slightly rusted, but opened easily. Inside, protected by more plastic, they found a stack of children's drawings, bright crayon scenes of houses and stick figures, signed in wobbly letters. Mikey. Beneath these were several packages of unopened snack bars. The kind Mikey had mentioned were his favorites, and an envelope. Tom opened the envelope and counted the bills inside. $800 in 20s and 50s, worn but usable. There was also a folded note, but Tom left it for later, watching Mikey's face as the boy picked up one of his old drawings. "He kept these," Mikey said softly, touching the corner of a picture showing 3 figures, one tall, one small, and one that might have been a dog. "I made this one when—" His voice caught. Scout pressed against Mikey's side, and the boy buried his face in the dog's fur for a moment. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet but clear. "He really wanted us to be okay, didn't he?" Tom felt something in his chest tighten. "Yeah, buddy. I think he did the best he could." They carefully repacked the box, Tom slipping it into his jacket to protect it from the rain. The walk back to the car was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. Scout stayed close to Mikey, occasionally looking back at Tom as if making sure they were all still together. As they emerged from the woods, Tom noticed a car parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. Through the rain, he could make out a figure in a black hoodie sitting in the driver's seat. The orange glow of a cigarette brightened briefly as the man took a drag. Tom guided Mikey and Scout to their car, trying to appear casual while keeping himself between them and the stranger. As he helped Mikey with his seatbelt, he saw the man in the hoodie pull out a phone and dial. The cigarette glowed again as he exhaled, speaking words Tom couldn't hear. "Yeah, the kid's still with him." The evening settled into Tom's apartment, with the soft sounds of pots clanking and water boiling. He moved around the small kitchen, preparing a simple pasta dinner, something his mother used to make when he and Evan were kids. The familiar motions felt therapeutic after the emotional weight of their morning discovery. Mikey sat at the table, his feet dangling from the chair, occasionally sneaking pieces of garlic bread under the table to Scout. The German shepherd's tail would thump against the floor in appreciation, creating a steady rhythm that filled the thoughtful silence between them. Steam rose from the plates as Tom served the pasta, the rich smell of tomato sauce and herbs filling the kitchen. He watched as Mikey twirled the spaghetti carefully around his fork, mimicking how Tom did it. The boy's movements were precise, deliberate, as if he was trying to do everything exactly right. "You know," Tom said, breaking the comfortable quiet, "I was thinking about that old shed by the river." He took a bite of pasta, trying to keep his tone casual. "Maybe we could fix it up sometime. Make it sturdy again like when your dad and I were kids." Mikey paused mid-bite, his fork hovering above the plate. A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not quite full, but more than Tom had seen before. The boy didn't say anything, but his shoulders relaxed slightly as he resumed eating. Scout's head appeared between them, resting on the edge of the table with hopeful eyes. Mikey slipped him another piece of garlic bread, and Tom pretended not to notice. The warmth of the moment felt fragile, like a soap bubble that might burst if examined too closely. After dinner, Mikey helped clear the table, carefully stacking dishes beside the sink. Tom ruffled his hair gently as he passed, and this time Mikey didn't flinch away. It felt like progress, however small. "Why don't you get ready for bed?" Tom suggested. "Maybe we can read one of those comics we found today." Mikey nodded and headed toward the bathroom, Scout padding along behind him. Tom watched them go, then pulled out his phone. He had 3 missed calls from Martinez, his partner at the precinct. With Mikey occupied, it seemed like a good time to return the call. Tom stepped into his bedroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. Martinez picked up on the second ring. "Hayes, finally. How's it going with the kid?" Tom sank onto the edge of his bed, suddenly exhausted. "It's complicated." "You can't keep this up forever, man. The department's going to start asking questions. And what about CPS?" I know. Tom ran a hand over his face. "But he's my brother's son. I can't just..." "Can't just what? Be responsible for him? You're not equipped for this, Hayes." The words hit too close to home. Tom's voice dropped lower, heavy with confession. "I don't know if I can raise him. I didn't sign up to be anyone's parent." He let out a long breath. "But I can't fail him like I failed Evan." "That's not fair to you or the kid. You need to think this through." What Tom didn't know was that Mikey stood just outside the bedroom door, Scout beside him, both completely still. The boy's small hands were clenched into fists, his chest tight with familiar pain. He'd heard these conversations before. Adults talking about what to do with him, where to send him, how he was too much trouble. Mikey backed away from the door silently, years of practice making his movements ghost-like. Scout followed, matching his careful steps. In his room, Mikey pulled his backpack from under the bed. He'd never fully unpacked it anyway. His hands trembled as he stuffed in some clean clothes, the few snacks he'd saved from their meals, and the drawing he'd found in the shed. Scout watched with concerned eyes as Mikey moved around the room, gathering what he needed. The boy paused at his dresser, looking at the photo of his father that Tom had framed for him. After a moment's hesitation, he left it behind. He'd learned that carrying memories was lighter than carrying things. From the other room, Tom's voice continued, muffled but still audible. "Maybe there's a better solution?" Mikey wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and zipped up the backpack. He'd known this would happen eventually. It always did. Better to leave now before they sent him away again. At least this way, it would be his choice. "Come on, Scout," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. The dog's ears perked up, but he whined softly, looking between Mikey and the direction of Tom's voice. Mikey opened the window carefully, wincing at the slight squeak. The fire escape waited outside, wet from the earlier rain. He'd noticed it the first day, had made sure he knew how to open the window quietly. It was what his dad had taught him. Always know your way out. Scout hesitated at the window, but Mikey patted his side. "Please," he whispered. "I need you." The German Shepherd finally followed, his nails clicking softly on the metal grating. Mikey closed the window most of the way behind them, leaving it cracked open just enough that it wouldn't latch. The night air was cool and damp against his face, carrying the promise of more rain. Inside, Tom was wrapping up his call. "I'll figure something out. Thanks for listening, Martinez." He ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet apartment, feeling the weight of decisions yet to be made. Finally, he stood up, heading to check on Mikey. The boy had been quiet. Too quiet, now that Tom thought about it. He knocked softly on the bedroom door. "Mikey? You ready for that comic?" No answer. Tom pushed the door open and his heart stopped. The room was empty, the window cracked open to the night air. Scout's bed was vacant, the blanket still holding the impression of where he'd last laid. No, Tom muttered, rushing to the window. He stuck his head out, looking up and down the fire escape, but saw no sign of them. Panic surged through his chest as he ran through the apartment, checking every room, calling their names. He burst out of the building onto the street, not even bothering with a jacket. "Mikey!" he shouted, voice echoing off the buildings. "Scout!" The streets were mostly empty, the few pedestrians hurrying past with umbrellas as the first drops of rain began to fall again. Tom spun in place, searching the shadows between buildings, the alleys, anywhere they might have gone. The rain picked up, running down his face as he called out again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Mikey! Please!" But only the sound of falling rain answered him. The midnight streets glistened under the steady rain, empty except for Tom's police cruiser crawling through the darkness. His headlights swept across abandoned storefronts and rain-slicked sidewalks, searching for any sign of movement. He'd been driving for hours, circling the same blocks over and over until they blurred together in his mind. His phone lay on the passenger seat, still warm from constant use. He'd called every hospital in a 20-mile radius, described Mikey to fellow officers, contacted homeless shelters and youth centers. Nothing. Each dead end twisted the knife of guilt deeper into his chest. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he remembered Mikey's half-smile at dinner, that tiny glimpse of trust beginning to form. How had he not realized the boy might hear him talking to Martinez? The words echoed in his head now, each one a fresh wound. "I didn't sign up to be anyone's parent." The wipers squeaked across the windshield, keeping time with his racing thoughts. He'd failed Evan, and now he was failing Evan's son. The same pattern, playing out all over again. Different choices, same result. A flash of movement caught his eye as he turned onto River Street. There, in the beam of his headlights, stood a familiar figure. Scout's fur was plastered to his body, dark with rain and something else. The German Shepherd limped forward, favoring his right side where a long gash traced his ribs. "Scout!" Tom slammed on the brakes, the cruiser sliding slightly on the wet pavement. He threw the car into park and jumped out, rain immediately soaking through his shirt. "Where's Mikey? Is he hurt?" Scout barked once, the sound sharp and urgent in the quiet night. He turned toward the woods that bordered the neighborhood, took a few limping steps, then looked back at Tom with clear intention. "Okay, buddy, lead the way." Tom grabbed his flashlight from the cruiser and followed as Scout picked his way through the trees. The dog moved slowly but purposefully, stopping occasionally to make sure Tom was still behind him. Branches whipped at Tom's face as they pushed deeper into the woods. His shoes sank into mud with each step, but he barely noticed. His entire world had narrowed to Scout's limping form ahead of him, each step bringing him closer to Mikey. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Scout led them to a concrete storm tunnel half buried in the hillside. Years of erosion had caused one side to partially collapse, creating a shelter of sorts. Tom's flashlight beam caught movement inside, a small figure huddled against the back wall. Mikey. Tom's voice cracked on the name. The boy was curled into himself, his backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. He was shivering violently, his clothes and hair soaked through. When the flashlight beam hit him, he squeezed his eyes shut and turned away. Tom dropped to his knees in the mud outside the tunnel entrance, not caring about the cold seeping through his pants. Scout limped over to Mikey, pressing against his side with a soft whine. "You were gonna give me away, weren't you?" Mikey's voice was barely audible over the rain, small and hurt, and so much older than his 9 years. "Just like everyone else." The accusation hit Tom like a physical blow. He set the flashlight down so it wouldn't shine in Mikey's eyes, casting their faces in soft, indirect light. "I said something stupid," he admitted, his throat tight. "I didn't mean it. I just..." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to face the truth. "I just didn't think I deserved you." Mikey looked up then, his face streaked with tears and rain and mud. "What?" "I couldn't save your dad." Tom's voice roughened with emotion. "I gave up on him. And now I'm terrified I'll fail you too. But running away from that fear, saying I couldn't be a parent, that was wrong. I was wrong." Scout's tail thumped once against the concrete as he looked between them. Mikey's grip on his backpack loosened slightly. "The truth is," Tom continued, "I'm scared, but not of taking care of you. I'm scared of how much I already care about you, how much it would hurt to lose you, when I couldn't find you tonight." He had to stop, compose himself. "I've never been so scared in my life." Mikey's lower lip trembled. "You promise you won't send me away?" "I promise." Tom held out his arms. "You're family, Mikey. You're my family." For a moment, nothing moved except the rain. Then Mikey launched himself forward, throwing his arms around Tom's neck. Tom pulled him close, one hand cradling the back of his head, the other wrapped protectively around his small body. It was their first real hug, and Tom could feel Mikey's heart hammering against his chest, could feel the boy's fingers clutching at his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. "I'm sorry," Mikey whispered into Tom's shoulder. "I was scared too." Tom held him tighter, his own tears mixing with the rain. "I know, buddy. I know." The morning sun filtered through Tom's kitchen window, casting warm patches of light across the linoleum floor where Scout lay stretched out. Tom knelt beside the German Shepherd, carefully cleaning the gash along his ribs with antiseptic. The wound wasn't as deep as it had looked in the dark, but it still needed attention. "Easy, buddy," Tom murmured as Scout flinched slightly. "Almost done." Mikey sat cross-legged on the floor next to them, one hand resting protectively on Scout's head. He hadn't left their side since they'd returned from the storm drain last night, as if afraid they might disappear if he looked away too long. His eyes followed Tom's movements intently as he applied the bandage. "Dad used to patch him up, too," Mikey said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. It was the first time he'd mentioned Evan without being prompted. "Scout got into fights with bigger dogs sometimes, trying to protect us." Tom smoothed the last piece of medical tape into place. "Sounds like Scout's always been brave." Yeah. Mikey scratched behind Scout's ears, earning a gentle tail wag. Dad said Scout was the runt of his litter. Nobody wanted him, 'cause he was so small. But Dad said sometimes the smallest ones have the biggest hearts. Tom sat back on his heels, watching as some invisible wall inside Mikey seemed to crack open. The boy's words started flowing faster, like a dam breaking. We found Scout behind the grocery store. His mom had died, and the other puppies were already gone. Dad wrapped him in his jacket, even though it was his only warm one. Mikey's fingers curled in Scout's fur. He said Scout chose us, not the other way around. Just like Scout chose you that night. Tom's throat tightened. He stood up, moving to the kitchen to start breakfast. Your dad always did have a way of seeing things differently. He tried really hard, you know. Mikey's voice followed him. Even when things got bad, he'd forget to buy food sometimes, but he always remembered Scout's food. And he'd tell the best jokes, especially when I was scared. Like this one about a penguin walking into a restaurant. Tom cracked eggs into a bowl, listening as Mikey recounted joke after joke. Some were terrible puns that made him groan, others surprisingly clever. But what struck him most was the way Mikey's face lit up as he told them, like he was sharing precious treasures. And then there was this time, Mikey continued between bites of scrambled eggs, when Dad couldn't afford Christmas presents. So he made this whole treasure hunt around our apartment, with clues and everything. The prize was just this little toy car he'd found, but the hunt was so fun I didn't care. The stories kept coming through breakfast. Some were happy, others harder. Nights spent in shelters, days when Evan couldn't get out of bed. But Mikey told them all with the same quiet intensity, like each memory was equally important. After breakfast, Tom took Mikey to a nearby thrift store. The boy needed clothes badly. Most of what he'd brought was worn thin or too small. Mikey moved through the racks carefully, checking price tags before touching anything. It's okay, Tom assured him. Get whatever you need. Mikey selected items slowly. A couple of t-shirts, jeans without holes, a warm hoodie for the coming fall. His choices were practical, measured. Tom added a few extra items when Mikey wasn't looking. Some superhero shirts, a soft blanket, new socks still in their package. As they walked out of the store, shopping bags in hand, Tom's instincts prickled. Across the street, a black sedan sat idling, the same one he'd spotted near the shed. The engine revved as soon as they emerged. Tom's hand tightened on Mikey's shoulder. Hey buddy, I just remembered I need to check something. Why don't you head back inside and look at those books we saw? Mikey glanced up at him, then at the car. Something in his expression suggested he understood more than he let on, but he nodded and went back into the store without argument. Tom walked casually to his car, then pulled out behind the sedan. The car accelerated smoothly, turning left at the next intersection. Tom followed at a distance, keeping two vehicles between them. At a red light, traffic bunched up, forcing the sedan to stop. Tom pulled alongside, finally getting a clear view of the driver. Curtis Monroe looked exactly like his mugshot. Sharp features, cold eyes, the kind of face that could charm or threaten with equal ease. He was speaking into a phone, gesturing sharply. When he noticed Tom watching, his expression didn't change, but his hand dropped to his lap where Tom suspected a weapon waited. The light turned green. Curtis pulled away, turning down a side street. Tom let him go. He had what he needed, confirmation that Curtis was actively tracking them. Back home, Tom double-checked every window lock, drew all the blinds, and activated the security system he'd installed years ago, but rarely used. Then he sat Mikey down at the kitchen table. Scout positioned himself between Mikey's knees, alert and protective. "There's something we need to talk about," Tom began carefully. "That man we saw today, the one in the black car. His name is Curtis Monroe. He knew your dad, but not in a good way." Mikey's hands twisted in Scout's fur. "Dad was scared of him sometimes." "Yeah, Curtis is dangerous. He might think your dad left something with you, something valuable." Tom watched Mikey's face closely. "Did your dad ever mention anything like that?" Mikey shook his head. "Just the money in the box." "But Curtis came to our apartment once when Dad was gone. Scout growled at him until he left." Tom leaned forward. "Mikey, I need you to understand how serious this is. Curtis isn't someone who gives up easily. That's why we need to be extra careful. No going outside alone, no opening doors or windows without checking with me first." "I understand." Mikey's voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. He looked down at Scout, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. A small, determined smile crossed Mikey's face. "He doesn't scare Scout. He won't scare me either." 2 restless days passed. Each hour waited with growing tension. Tom's apartment had become a fortress of double-checked locks and drawn curtains. Dark circles shadowed his eyes from nights spent listening for any unusual sounds, his hand never far from his service weapon. On the 3rd morning, Tom made a decision. He couldn't keep Mikey locked away forever, and the boy needed some normalcy. His colleague Mark had offered several times to have Mikey over to play with his kids. It seemed like the safest option. Mark was a decorated officer with a secure home in a good neighborhood. "You'll like Sarah and Danny," Tom told Mikey as they drove. "They're around your age. They've got a huge backyard with a tree house." Mikey sat quietly in the back seat beside Scout, who had refused to be left behind. The dog's watchful presence had become non-negotiable since Curtis's appearance. "Will you stay too?" Mikey asked, his voice small. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I've got to take care of something important. But Mark and Lisa will be there the whole time. Scout can stay with you, too." He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching Mikey's uncertain expression. The boy had grown more comfortable with him over the past week, but separation still triggered visible anxiety. "Hey," Tom said softly, "remember what we talked about? Sometimes being brave means letting other people help keep us safe." Mikey nodded, though his fingers remained twisted in Scout's fur. When they arrived, Mark's kids burst out the front door with excited waves. Scout gave them a thorough inspection before allowing them near Mikey, making Tom smile despite his worry. "He'll be fine," Mark assured him quietly. "Lisa's got her service weapon, and I've got cameras on every entrance. No one's getting near these kids." Tom watched Mikey follow the others toward the backyard, Scout trotting protectively beside him. "I shouldn't be more than 2 hours. Call me if anything seems off, even slightly," Mark finished. "We've got this, Tom. Go do what you need to do." 20 minutes later, Tom parked outside the Red Door, a dingy bar on the edge of town. It was Curtis's regular haunt, according to his CIs. The kind of place that operated on cash only and didn't ask questions. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through grimy windows as Tom stepped inside. The bar was nearly empty this early. A few regulars hunched over their drinks, and behind the counter, a weathered bartender wiped endless circles on the wooden surface. In the far corner, Curtis Monroe sat alone, nursing what looked like whiskey. Tom approached slowly, letting his footsteps announce his presence. Curtis didn't look up until Tom's shadow fell across his table. "Officer Hayes," Curtis drawled, a cold smile playing at his lips. "Or is it just concerned uncle today? We need to talk." Tom remained standing, using his height to full advantage. "Whatever game you're playing needs to stop. Now." Curtis gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Have a seat. Let's be civilized about this." "I prefer standing." Suit yourself. Curtis took a slow sip of his drink. Though I gotta say, I don't know what game you're talking about. I'm just a businessman trying to make my way. A businessman who follows children? Tom's voice dropped dangerously low. Who watches houses and stalks parking lots? Curtis spread his hands in mock innocence. Public streets, aren't they? Free country, last I checked. Cut the act. Whatever Evan took from you, whatever you think Mikey knows about, it's not worth what'll happen if you don't back off. Something flickered in Curtis's eyes at the mention of stolen goods. His smile tightened. Evan was always sloppy with other people's property. Guess he never told you about the little nest egg he was building? The one he kept in that falling down shed? Tom's pulse quickened. They hadn't told anyone about finding the hidden box. Curtis had just confirmed he was watching them that day. Stay away from my nephew, Tom growled. This is your only warning. Curtis leaned forward, all pretense of friendliness vanishing. That kid ain't yours. You think that changes anything? Blood don't mean much these days, especially coming from someone who threw his own brother away. Tom's fists clenched at his sides. I'm filing a restraining order. You come within 100 yards of Mikey again, you'll see exactly how much things have changed. Threats from a cop? Curtis's laugh was ugly. Better be careful, Officer Hayes. Wouldn't want anything to compromise that guardianship paperwork you're planning. Tom turned and walked out, his whole body humming with tension. Curtis's words followed him. Say hi to the pup for me. The drive to the courthouse was a blur. Tom filed the restraining order with a judge who owed him a favor, ensuring it would be processed quickly and quietly. Then he picked up guardianship papers, his mind already planning the next steps. Better security systems, maybe a transfer to a safer precinct, whatever it took to keep Mikey protected. The sun was setting when he pulled into his apartment complex. Something felt wrong immediately. The front door was closed, but the porch light he always left on was dark. Tom drew his weapon, approaching carefully. Inside, chaos greeted him. The living room had been ransacked, furniture overturned, cushions slashed open, pictures torn from walls. Cold air drifted in from the kitchen where the back door stood wide open, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. Mikey? Tom called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. Scout? No answer. His heart pounding, Tom cleared each room methodically, finding more destruction, but no signs of struggle. In Mikey's room, the bed was still made, unused. Scout's leash was missing from its hook by the door. Tom's phone was in his hand instantly, dialing Mark's number. It rang once before his friend's worried voice answered. Tom? Thank God. Lisa's been trying to reach you. Mikey, he's gone. Scout too. We were all in the backyard and somehow... I'm so sorry. We looked everywhere. The phone slipped from Tom's numb fingers. Curtis had made his move, but he hadn't struck here. He'd taken Mikey right from under their noses, using their own sense of security against them. The ransacked apartment was just a message, a reminder of how easily he could reach them. Tom stared at the open back door, its broken lock a mockery of all his careful preparations. Somewhere out there, Mikey was with Curtis, but Scout was with him too, and that thought held a glimmer of hope. The dog had led Tom to Mikey once before. He would do it again. Tom's hand shook as he moved through the devastated living room, his trained eyes taking in every detail. Muddy footprints marked a clear path toward the back alley, their treaded pattern unfamiliar and deliberate. Scout's blue leash lay abandoned near the kitchen, dragging across the linoleum like a forgotten snake. The sight made his stomach clench. He pulled out his phone again, forcing his fingers to stay steady as he dialed Mark's number. Tell me exactly what happened." "We were all in the backyard," Mark's voice cracked with guilt. "Lisa went in to get drinks. The kids were on the swings. Then Danny came running back, saying someone had come to pick up Mikey, said you'd sent them." Tom's jaw tightened. "What did this person look like?" "Danny said it was a woman, claimed to be your sister. Mikey seemed to know her, went without fighting. Scout followed them both. We didn't realize anything was wrong until Lisa tried calling you 20 minutes later." "A woman?" Curtis was smart enough not to show his face. Tom ended the call and dialed the precinct, requesting an immediate BOLO for Mikey and activating his emergency response team. But he knew waiting wasn't an option. Think like Evan, he told himself, scanning the room again. Where would his brother have gone if he was scared, if he needed somewhere to hide? The answer hit him like a physical blow. The rail yard. It was where they'd played as kids, where Evan had crashed when he first got into trouble. The perfect place to corner someone without witnesses. Tom grabbed his backup weapon from the gun safe and rushed to his car. The sun had fully set now, casting deep shadows across the streets as he sped toward the old neighborhood. His headlights caught glimpses of graffiti-covered walls and broken windows, a forgotten part of town where people learned to look the other way. A flash of movement caught his eye. There, in the beam of his headlights, Scout! The German Shepherd was running with a pronounced limp, but his eyes were alert and focused. He barked once at Tom's car, before darting down a side street. Tom's tires squealed as he followed, keeping the dog in sight. Scout led him through a maze of abandoned buildings, finally stopping at a rusted chain-link fence that separated the street from the railway tracks. The dog squeezed through a gap without hesitation. Killing the engine, Tom followed on foot. The fence rattled as he climbed over, his shoes crunching on gravel and broken glass when he landed. Scout was already moving again, leading him across a set of unused tracks toward a massive warehouse. Its windows were mostly broken, and faded warning signs hung crooked on its walls. As Tom approached, he heard voices echoing from inside. He drew his weapon and moved closer, using the shadows for cover. "I know there's more." Curtis' voice bounced off metal walls. "Your dad wasn't stupid enough to leave just a few hundred in that shed? Where's the rest of it?" "I don't know." Mikey's voice was high with fear, but steady. "He never told me about any money." Tom reached a side door and peered through. The warehouse's interior was dim, lit only by a few emergency lights that still had power. In the center of the vast space, Mikey sat tied to a metal chair, his small frame dwarfed by the industrial surroundings. Curtis paced in front of him, running his hands through his hair in agitation. A knife glinted in his right hand. "Don't lie to me, kid," Curtis snarled. "Evan owed me big. That money was mine and he knew it. He must have told you something, left some kind of message." Tom assessed the situation quickly. Curtis was unstable, desperate. Direct confrontation could make him unpredictable. Taking a deep breath, Tom stepped into view, his weapon raised. "Curtis!" he called out firmly. "Step away from him." Curtis whirled around, pulling Mikey's chair closer and pressing the knife against the boy's shoulder. "Well, well, the hero arrives." His smile was manic. "Throw your gun over here, or we'll find out if the kid bleeds like his daddy did." "You don't want to do this." Tom kept his voice calm, though his heart hammered. "Whatever Evan took, it's not worth adding kidnapping and assault charges. Throw the gun over." Curtis pressed the blade harder, making Mikey whimper. Tom slowly lowered his weapon, preparing to slide it across the floor. But before he could, a blur of fur and fury launched from the shadows. Scout, who had circled behind during the confrontation, clamped his jaws around Curtis's forearm with savage force. Curtis screamed, the knife clattering to the ground as Scout's weight dragged him away from Mikey. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and snarling dog. Blood sprayed across the concrete. Tom didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, tackling Curtis just as the man managed to throw Scout off. They grappled briefly, but Tom's training took over. In seconds, he had Curtis face down, securing his hands behind his back with zip ties from his utility belt. Only then did Tom look up at Mikey. The boy sat frozen in the chair, trembling but physically unhurt. Tom quickly cut through the ropes binding him, then dropped to his knees and pulled Mikey into a fierce embrace. "I've got you," he whispered, feeling Mikey's small arms wrap around his neck. "I'm not letting go again. Never again." Mikey pressed his face into Tom's shoulder, his whole body shaking with silent sobs. In the distance, sirens began to wail, backup finally arriving. Scout limped over and collapsed beside them, his muzzle bloody but his tail wagging weakly as he pressed against Mikey's leg. Curtis lay quietly on the ground, all his desperate energy seemingly drained. The sound of multiple vehicles screeching to a halt outside echoed through the warehouse, followed by the thunder of boots as tactical teams rushed in, weapons drawn. 2 weeks passed like a gentle exhale after holding your breath too long. The Hayes household settled into a rhythm that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if the pieces had always been meant to fit this way. The living room, once torn apart by violence, now held the quiet comfort of evening routines. Homework spread across the coffee table, Scout's bed tucked into the corner, and family photos slowly finding their way onto previously bare walls. Tom sat at the kitchen table one morning, watching steam rise from his coffee as he reviewed Mikey's latest therapy notes. "The boy was making progress, Doctor," Martinez had written, showing increased verbal communication and decreased anxiety responses. Tom couldn't help but smile, remembering how Mikey had actually laughed yesterday when Scout tried to catch his own tail. Scout lay nearby, his healing wounds now hidden under fresh fur. The stitches in his side were dissolving, though he still favored that leg slightly when he walked. It didn't stop him from following Mikey everywhere, maintaining his self-appointed role as guardian even in these calmer days. Mikey's nightmares had grown less frequent. Tom no longer woke to muffled crying or the sound of small feet pacing at midnight. Instead, he often found Mikey peacefully asleep. Scout curled protectively at the foot of his bed. The therapy appointments, twice weekly now, seemed to be helping them both. Tom had surprised himself by opening up during the family sessions, sharing memories of Evan he'd locked away years ago. One particularly bright Saturday morning, Tom loaded the car while Mikey was still eating breakfast. He packed the trunk carefully, fresh lumber he'd picked up from the hardware store, several cans of weather-resistant paint in cheerful colors, and 2 complete toolkits. The smaller one, child-sized, but with real tools, had been a careful purchase he'd been saving for the right moment. "Ready for an adventure?" Tom asked when Mikey emerged from the house, Scout trotting faithfully beside him. Mikey nodded, climbing into the back seat where he could keep one hand buried in Scout's fur during the drive. They wound through the city and out toward the wooded park, where Tom and Evan had spent countless summer days as kids. The old oak tree still stood proud near the back of the park, its branches reaching toward the sky like welcoming arms. Tom parked in the gravel lot and led Mikey down the familiar trail. When they reached the massive oak, he opened the trunk and began unloading their supplies. "Your dad had big dreams for you," Tom said softly, watching Mikey's expression. "He started something here, years ago, before—" He trailed off, then squared his shoulders. "He wanted to build you a treehouse. I thought maybe we could finish it together." Mikey's eyes widened as he took in the pile of supplies. He ran his hand over a smooth board, then looked up at Tom with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Really? Really, Tom confirmed, pulling out the smaller toolkit. This one's yours. Want to learn how to build something? The day unfolded in a series of precious moments. Tom showed Mikey how to measure twice and cut once, how to hold a hammer properly, how to check if boards were level. Scout lounged in patches of sunlight below, occasionally barking encouragement when they secured a particularly challenging piece. As they worked, stories flowed naturally between them. Tom told Mikey about the time Evan had tried to build a raft for the creek, using only twine and fallen branches. It sank immediately, he chuckled, but your dad just laughed and started collecting more sticks. He never gave up easily. Mikey absorbed every word, asking questions about his father's childhood adventures. His small hands grew steadier with each nail he drove, his confidence building as the treehouse took shape around them. When he successfully installed an entire board by himself, his proud smile lit up the clearing. By late afternoon, they had the basic structure in place, a simple square platform with half walls and the beginnings of a roof. Tom spread out an old blanket in the corner and pulled their lunch from his backpack. Simple peanut butter sandwiches never tasted better than they did sitting in their half-finished treehouse, legs dangling over the edge as they watched the sun begin its descent. Mikey chewed thoughtfully, then reached into his pocket. He carefully unfolded a piece of paper and smoothed it against his knee. Tom recognized the familiar sheet from Mikey's therapy art sessions, but this drawing was new. 3 stick figures stood hand in hand, drawn in bright crayon colors. One was tall, wearing what looked like a police badge. The middle figure was smaller, with a big smile. The third figure had pointed ears and a long tail. Above them, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "My family." "This is you, me, and Scout," Mikey said quietly, his fingers tracing the figures. He glanced at Scout, who had climbed the ladder to join them and now lay with his head on Mikey's lap. "Scout says I should call you Uncle now." His voice grew softer, almost shy. "I think he's right." Tom felt his throat tighten, emotion welling up sudden and strong. He blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears that insisted on coming anyway. One escaped, rolling down his cheek as he nodded. "I'd like that," he managed to say, his voice rough with feeling. "I'd like that very much." The drive home was peaceful, Mikey dozing in the back seat while Scout kept watch. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch light cast a warm glow across the front steps, welcoming them home. Tom was just helping a sleepy Mikey out of the car when the doorbell rang. Ms. Wilson, their caseworker, stood on the porch with an envelope in her hands. Her smile was genuine as she held it out to Tom. "Final guardianship approval," she said simply. "Just needs your signature." Tom signed the papers right there on the porch, his hand steady despite the magnitude of the moment. As soon as he finished, Mikey wrapped his arms around Tom's waist in a fierce hug. Scout barked once, a sound of pure joy, and settled himself against their legs, completing their circle. There was no fanfare, no dramatic music swelling in the background, just the quiet click of a pen, the warm weight of a child's embrace, and the soft woof of a dog's contented sigh. In that moment, peace felt like the greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed the story of Tom and Mikey, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.